It's really great to be with you guys today. It's amazing. I was sat there last night and I thought, I'm not actually speaking to the People's Army. I'm speaking to the party army. Some of Nigel's team backstage, they said, listen, Professor, this conference is going so well. Can you not bore everybody with your statistics? I said, well, I'm going to give you two statistics right from the top. Because this morning we had some polling on our new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. And the British people were asked, how well do you think Keir Starmer's doing as Prime Minister? Maybe I should poll this room. 34% said, I think he's doing quite well. I'd like to have what they're having because it's strong stuff. 53% said, I think he's doing badly. He's only been in the job for 2 months. Now that gives him, in my world, a net leadership rating of -19. And that's what I call Prince Harry territory. And I tell you, I think if this government keeps going the way it is, by Christmas he's going to be in Prince Andrew territory. Now, I was asked along to talk to you about who's voting for reform and the People's Army. And they asked me because I've done a load of surveys. I've done the biggest surveys on reform voters in the country. If you read my newsletter, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I want to start with a story. I'm going to tell you a brief story about a young British man, and I want you to remember his name. His name is Thomas Roberts. Thomas Roberts was an aspiring Marine. He wanted to serve his country. In 2022, Thomas Roberts was murdered by an illegal migrant from Afghanistan called Lawangin Abdul Rahamzai. He won't grow up to serve his country. He won't marry his girlfriend and have children. He won't have another pint with his mates. At every stage of this tragic story, Thomas Roberts and his family were let down by the state and by the elite class. It is an unbelievable story. It was their policy of open borders and mass migration that allowed this guy to enter Britain illegally. When he arrived, eventually meeting the authorities, he told them he was 14. So they put him, without checking, into a secondary school next to Year 9 school children. Conference, he wasn't 14. He was 19, and he'd already killed 2 men in Serbia. When he went to see the dentist said, this guy isn't 14. And even still, the authorities didn't check anything out. He went on to assault school children, his foster mother, and 2 days before he murdered Thomas Roberts, he was reported to be walking around the streets of Bournemouth with a machete. And the police couldn't find him. Now, Thomas Roberts' mum and his family said that he's been swept under the carpet, that the state don't want to talk about him, because one of the most remarkable bits about this story is that even the coroner concluded that there wasn't going to be a full inquest into his death because she concluded there were no systemic failures. Now, I don't know about you, but if this case doesn't highlight systemic failures, I don't know what does. And his family said, you know, they've thrown our son under the carpet. I've never met his family, but if they're watching today, I would like them to know that there are people in this country that are talking about their son, that aren't going to forget their son and are going to do whatever they can to ensure that other children are not murdered on Britain's streets by people who shouldn't be in our country to begin with. Now, why did I begin with that story? Because this is about this movement. If you ask Reform voters, why are you voting Reform? The number one issue, stop the boats, secure the borders. It's not even close. Everything else is second, distant second and third. This is a movement that is being driven by people who want to feel secure and safe in their own country. And they've got good reason to think that way. Since 2018, we've had nearly 138,000 people enter Britain illegally on more than 4,000 small boats. Your first act in entering Britain cannot be to break the law. And if you look at what this tells us about the country, it tells us a great deal. A nation that cannot control its own borders is not a serious nation. A country that cannot control who's coming in and out is not a serious country. And for many people in Britain today, what makes this especially galling is a hypocrisy that underpins many of the decisions that are or are not being taken by the Home Office and other government agencies. We are taking away winter fuel payments from 10 million pensioners to save £1.5 billion, while we're spending £7 billion on this broken asylum system. It doesn't make any sense. It's crazy, completely insane. And to top it off, David Lamy, or as I've learned at this conference, Loony Lamy, came out a couple of weeks ago and he said, well, I'm going to spend another £100 million giving it to tin pot dictatorships in the Middle East and Africa to try and stop migration upstream, while not bothering to control our borders here in Britain. It doesn't make any sense. Now look, conference, if it's a choice between giving £100 million to other countries versus giving £100 million to British pensioners, I choose British pensioners every single time. And, you know, the worst bit in all of this as well, while I'm on a roll, is for people who then stand up and say, actually, I'd quite like to control our own borders, I'd quite like to lower migration, I'd quite like to know who's coming in and out of the country, they now get hit with the new word in town, the new word in Westminster. I'm sure you'll hear a lot about it at the Labour conference. Misinformation. Ask questions about mass immigration, you're misinformed. Suggest that this might be driving up house prices and rents, you're misinformed. Suggest that immigration might be increasing crime rates, especially sexual assaults, you're misinformed. But you know what's remarkable is a couple of weeks ago, I watched a committee discussion with 5 Reform MPs. That discussion was only happening because Reform won 5 MPs, in which a series of remarkable revelations were made. The Department for Work and Pensions is no longer making information on welfare by nationality and immigration status available to the British public. Gets worse. HMRC no longer making information on tax credits and tax benefits by nationality and immigration status available to the British public. The Home Office not making data on prisoners and arrests by nationality and immigration status available to the British public. No longer giving us detailed information on how much accommodation and housing for illegal migrants is costing the British taxpayer. Either they have that data and they're refusing to share that data, or they're simply not collecting it in the first place. And then when you ask questions, they accuse you of misinformation. I say if they're so confident about this experiment, because that's what mass immigration is, it's an experiment. We've never done this before. No country has ever gone through this level of demographic change and had a sense of certainty about what is on the other side. If you're so confident about this experiment, show us the data. Let's see it. Because I can tell you, based on what I do, this data is available in lots of other countries. Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, increasingly Germany, suddenly realizing that maybe this experiment wasn't such a good idea to begin with. And it tells a remarkably consistent story. Mass immigration isn't an unquestionably positive thing for society. In fact, what it shows is that the very kind of migration that we now have in this country, which is low-wage, low-skill, non-selective migration from outside of Europe, is a net fiscal cost, not a net fiscal benefit to Western economies. That is what the studies are showing. Which is why I wasn't surprised by the Office for Budget Responsibility finally the expert class in the UK starting to realize what has been blindingly obvious to everybody else for the last 10 years, that actually low-wage, low-skill migration in the UK, on average, every low-skill, low-wage migrant is costing the British taxpayer £150,000, which rises to £500,000 if they live to the age of 80 and rises to £1 million if they live to the age of 100. The economic case for mass immigration is falling apart. The only people who don't want to accept that are the people who have presided over this broken experiment. And this was all brought in by the Conservatives, by the way. New Labour opened the gates in 2004. But I'm just going to be real with you. It was Boris Johnson who liberalised the entire system. It was Boris Johnson who promised the country that he was going to lower migration and introduce a high-skill, points-based system that was going to bring over the best and the brightest. And what he gave the country was the total opposite of that policy.
Prosecuted.
Now, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Well, if you vote Conservative over and over again while expecting a different outcome, I'm afraid you are because what the Conservatives are clinging to is what the Labour Party is clinging to. It's the same elite consensus that's been governing this country for the last half-century. Big state, big regulation, big tax, big debt, big on woke, big immigration, big on elites, big on everything except the British people. That's the elite consensus. And that's why reform voters are so distrustful of the established political class. Again, you say to them, what are the top issues? I want to stop the small boats, number one. I want to lower legal immigration, number two. I want to bring down the cost of living, number three. I want a politics that represents ordinary working people like me. Those are your core issues. Now, one of the mistakes new parties make is they start focusing on stuff outside of their core issues. Because they get excited. Suddenly they want a full manifesto with detailed policies on everything from, climate change, net zero, housing, education, pensions, environment, you name it, the whole bag. What I would suggest to you as a new party is you need to stay laser-like focused on your core issues. Core issues. Because if you actually look at the state of public opinion in this country, what ordinary people out there are thinking and feeling, you speak for a much larger number of people than you are led to believe by the newspapers and television channels in this country. You are told time and time again that you represent a fringe minority. You are told time and time again that you are the populists who speak for no more than 10% of Britain. Well, let me just share a few more statistics with you so I can irritate the guys backstage. 66% of all people in Britain think immigration is too high. 85% think the governments on both the left and the right have been managing this issue badly. 2/3 of Britain think the country has lost control of its own borders. Only 20% of Brits think mass immigration has been good for Britain. You are speaking for the forgotten majority. That is what is going on here. You're speaking for a majority of people in this country who are saying, I want to lower legal immigration into Britain back down to reasonable, sensible, and respectful levels. You're speaking for a majority of people in this country who think that it's absolutely essential that the British people are treated with respect and decency by having strong borders that keep them and their children safe and secure in their own country. You're speaking for a majority of people in this country who think that we should be teaching children what is rooted in biological reality and scientific fact. That we shouldn't be teaching children that little boys can become little girls and little girls can become little boys. You're speaking for a majority of people in this country who are proud of their national history, who accept that Britain didn't always get everything right, but on balance it did more good than it did wrong in the past. And you're speaking for a majority of people in this country who think that actually there's more to who we are than a bland celebration of diversity. This is what the elite class are trying to do. You see it, right? They're trying to repackage who we are around a bland, universal celebration of diversity that could just as easily apply to any other nation in the world. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say that the only thing that defines the British, the only thing that defines the English, is that we celebrate multiculturalism. But actually, to say that a nation is welcoming of diversity is fine. But it cannot be the basis of our identity, because it's like saying we have no real identity of our own. So you're representing a majority of people in this country who do think there's something incredibly special about coming from these islands, who do think that actually we should be proud of our history, we should be proud of our culture, we should be proud of our values, we should be proud of our ways of life, we should be proud of our contribution to Western civilization, and we should pass on that pride to the next generation through schools, through universities, and through public institutions. I don't think what I'm saying today is controversial or shocking at all. I think this is mainstream, common sense politics that appeals to 60, 70, 80% of people in this country. So when I was asked to come along and speak, I not only wanted to make you aware of a few cases that have touched me personally, and I've felt appalled by some of the things that have happened in our country, and I want you to go away and just know a few names and tell people about those cases. But I also wanted to try and give people in this room a sense of confidence, an awareness that you're not speaking for 10% or 14% of the country. On many of these issues, you are speaking for the forgotten majority, which is why I think ultimately, when we come back here in 4 years, 5 years, or we come back after the elections in Wales, or we come back after the local elections, I don't think I'm going to be talking to a party on 14% of the national vote at a general election. I think I'm going to be talking to a political party that has completely reshaped the front lines of British politics and put the British people back in charge. So thank you very much.